There are errors in the Book of Mormon that are unique to the 1769 edition of the Bible, the one owned by Joseph's family. DNA analysis has concluded that the Native Americans do not originate from the Middle East or Israelites, but from Asia. There are things in the Book of Mormon that didn't exist during Book of Mormon times in the Americas. For example, horses, chariots, goats, elephants, wheat, and steel. There is no archaeological evidence for the millions of Nephites and Lamanites, even though we have evidence from smaller groups of people who existed thousands of years before. Book of Mormon names and places are strikingly similar or identical to many local names and places of the region where Joseph Smith lived. The Book of Mormon is remarkably similar to View of the Hebrews, a book published in Joseph Smith's area in his time. It is also very similar to the First Book of Napoleon, published in 1809, and The Late War, a textbook written in King James-style language for the New York State school children in Joseph's time. The original 1830 text of the Book of Mormon had a Trinitarian view of the Godhead, and was changed over time as Joseph's ideas about the Godhead evolved. Over 100,000 changes have been made to the book. There are at least 4 different first vision accounts given by Joseph at different times, at least one of which didn't even include God or Christ. Scholars have translated the papyrus Joseph claimed the Book of Abraham was translated from, and found that they have nothing to do with Abraham or anything contained in the book. The church now tries to claim that translate meant get inspiration from. Joseph also penciled in some parts of the papyrus. Joseph married at least 34 women, many without Emma's consent, as forbidden in the Doctrine and Covenants, and 11 of whom were already married, some without their husbands knowing. 10 of Joseph's wives were teenagers, some as young as 14. This was shocking, even by 19th century standards. Joseph also married some of his foster daughters. Joseph used a variety of methods to coerce women into marrying him, including promises of eternal life, threats of damnation, and even claiming that he himself was under the threat of an angel with a flaming sword. President Hinckley publicly said polygamy isn't doctrinal, despite teachings by numerous early church leaders, including Brigham Young, that it was essential for exaltation. The only scriptural justification for polygamy is to multiply and replenish the earth. So either Joseph was sleeping with his 14-year-old wives, or he wasn't adhering to the scriptural laws. Joseph married Fanny Alger years before he had the sealing power or received any revelation on polygamy. Brigham Young taught Adam-God theory at General Conference and as part of the Temple Endowment ceremony. This doctrine is now disavowed by the church. Brigham Young taught blood atonement, now also disavowed. This doctrine factored into the events which led up to the Mountain Meadows Massacre, where church leaders murdered over 100 pioneers traveling through Utah. Black people weren't allowed to hold the priesthood until the 1970s. Joseph gave it to a few people, but from Brigham Young to Spencer W. Kimball, they were deemed unworthy to hold it. In the 1980s, the church paid around $900,000 to suppress bizarre and embarrassing church history documents. These documents were later proven to be fake. Mark Hoffman, the forger, turned out to be a murderer. Before the documents were known to be forgeries, church leaders gave talks offering explanations for them. Joseph Smith translated plates called the Kinderhook plates. He claimed they were a record of a descendant of Ham from the Old Testament. These plates were later found to be a hoax. Every spin-off of the LDS Church also has members say that they know their church is the true church. Other religions, such as Islam, say they know through the power of God. It's these same spiritual feelings that led to the mass suicide of the Heaven's Gate cult. Joseph sent Oliver and Hiram to sell the copyright to the Book of Mormon in Canada, saying he received a revelation to do it. They failed to secure the copyright, leading Joseph to conclude that not all revelations are from God. The church teaches that you should bear your testimony in order to gain one. This is a classic psychological tactic. You can feel the Spirit while doing a multitude of things that have nothing to do with the gospel, even while watching some R-rated movies. Joseph and Oliver didn't tell people about the priesthood restoration until years after supposedly receiving it, and changed earlier revelations to match their new accounts. Joseph was hired to use the seer stone to find buried treasure, for which he was taken to court on charges of fraud. The Smith family was involved in folk magic and the occult, practicing animal sacrifice, conjuring spirits, and using magical parchments and talismans. People at Joseph's time had a magical worldview, which included seeing things with spiritual eyes, including the golden plates. Martin Harris was known as a gullible man who changed religions at least 10 times. Even after becoming Mormon, he was a witness to self-proclaimed prophet James Strang. Strang also had gold plates and used a Urim and Thummim to translate them. Martin Harris also said that he had as much evidence for a Shaker book as he had for the Book of Mormon. He also said he saw Christ in the form of a deer and talked with him. David Whitmer said he saw an angel with his spiritual eyes, and said his impressions were just like those of a Methodist having happy feelings. People in Joseph's time believed in a spiritual second sight, and that it was no different than seeing something with your physical eyes. The witnesses did not sign their own signatures or write their own accounts, except Oliver, who was the scribe. All of the Book of Mormon witnesses, except for Martin Harris, were related by blood or marriage to the Smiths or the Whitmers. Joseph had many people sign an affidavit saying he wasn't practicing polygamy when he was. Some of those who signed it were also practicing polygamy. Joseph didn't even use the gold plates to translate the Book of Mormon. He also couldn't retranslate the missing 116 pages taken by Martin Harris's wife to test Joseph's validity as a translator. Joseph revealed the LDS Temple endowment just 7 weeks after his Masonic initiation. The endowment is nearly identical to the Masonic ceremony in numerous ways. The temple ceremony was supposed to be eternal, yet blood oaths and other disturbing elements were removed in the 1980s, just a few years after those elements were removed from the Masonic ceremony. Joseph Smith made a number of prophecies that were never fulfilled. According to Deuteronomy 18, this would disqualify him as a prophet. If Adam and Eve were the first humans, how do we explain the 14 other hominin species, who lived and died 35,000 to 250,000 years before Adam? Science has proven there was no worldwide flood 4,500 years ago. Simple mathematics and logic of animal food consumption show there was insufficient room on the ark to house all of the animal species found on the planet, let alone the food required to feed them. Science also discredits the idea of the Tower of Babel, 600-year-old humans, Jonah and the whale, people turning into salt, and carrying honeybees across the ocean. In contrast to Jesus Christ, the Old Testament God condoned genocide, slavery, rape, and racism. The Church has removed material that is not faith-promoting from its history and been dishonest on numerous occasions. In Kirtland, Joseph created an illegal bank and used fraudulent means to raise money. Once his fraud was discovered, he fled to Canada, leaving the church members to pay his debts. The church has not been transparent about its finances since 1959. The church spent $1.5 billion on City Creek Mall, more than it spent on humanitarian aid in almost 20 years. The early church taught that tithing was 10% of your surplus. The church now teaches that it's 10% of your income, even if you can't afford to pay your bills because of it. The church's name has changed a few times, at one point removing Jesus Christ and being called the Church of the Latter-day Saints. The church has taught that the prophet can't lead the church astray, despite obvious mistakes made by past prophets. Church leaders such as Boyd K. Packer have counseled historians to avoid telling the truth if it isn't faith-promoting. In 1993, 6 scholars were excommunicated or disfellowshipped for publishing their scholarly research on Mormonism and its leaders. Dallin H. Oaks said, "You shouldn't criticize church leaders, even if the criticism is true."